All right, I'm going to go ahead and start recording.
Okay, great. So yeah, I just wanted to kind of go through this training session with the fleet operations team around remote access for troubleshooting. There's obviously been quite a lot of solutions we've developed over the past 3 or 4 years, especially using the GWR21 and WR31 and others. And so wanted to kind of get a lot of the information in one presentation. There's been kind of a lot of ad hoc assistance through apps escalation. So this is kind of the current state of things with regards to remote access. Obviously, things are kind of in a transitional stage, so we don't necessarily have a one-size-fits-all solution, but hopefully with this, you get a sense of what are the options, what are the preferences, what are the pros and cons of each method, so that ideally you have at least one solution that you can use for every site where you require remote access to either just the Aqua Suite or other devices that might be on site. So with that said, let me go ahead and kick off the next slide here. So the 3 options I'd like to present in kind of a very simplistic fashion are, number 1, the LocusNet VPN, which I think you guys have had some exposure to in terms of being an end user. We're just going to, again, talk about you using LocusNet VPN for yourselves. This isn't going to cover anything with regards to client support or external use. Number 2 is the Obvious Remote Assist solution that Obvious actually put together for us this year. There's a lot of benefits to this solution that I'll get into. And then the last option here, which I think has been the prevailing popular method to access devices remotely, is using the static IP address from AT&T and just using that and some port forwarding rules to access specific devices. It's a fast and true method. There are some problems with it though, so I would like to make the argument that should be our last method that we try to access these sites. So kind of jumping into the LocusNet VPN, a lot of the time we'll kind of refer to FortiCloud. Again, FortiCloud is kind of our internal partner and backend solutions in this. Client-facing, and in terms of the overall implementation of the solution, we should refer to it as LocusNet VPN, but in case I use FortiCloud interchangeably, that's the reason why, and I'll go into a little bit more of an overview on how that works before we kind of talk specifics for our use case. So basically, the LocusNet VPN allows us to access all on-site TCP devices. You can imagine that's pretty powerful for us. We use it, and our customers will use it. It uses standard security protocols with regards to TCP/IP connectivity, specifically IPsec and OpenVPN. We don't require a wide area network public static IP address, which has a lot of pros. We don't care what carrier we're using. We don't need to look up things on AT&T or simply else. All this would be centralized. It doesn't matter what protocol we're using, so we don't necessarily need to set up appropriate rules or configurations to support certain devices. As long as they're on our network, we can access them remotely, which is really great. We can control access. A lot of the configuration is flexible in the cloud, and it really allows us to access all of our devices internally with the most capability while still maintaining sort of best security practices for our clients. So the overall architecture of the LocusNet VPN solution can really be broken down into 3 different parts. I'll kind of start with the right-hand side first. So on the right-hand side, you'll see it says IPsec here. Basically, every device in the field that will be enabled with our LocusNet VPN solution, right now that's just the WR31 and 21 modems, uses IPsec protocol to connect to the LocusNet VPN. So your DigiModems basically have a setting in them to allow them to tunnel back to FortiCloud, which is our sort of backend solutions provider, and maintain a connection to that. That's not specific to any ports or a public static IP address. It's just reaching out and saying, I'm here, I've established a connection with you, here are all the devices I've connected to you. Going into the actual backbone of this, which is FortiCloud here, FortiCloud is a cloud solutions provider for route processing for VPNs. So basically, the right-hand side is the end device. The left-hand side is our end user. So you'll notice there's a partner kind of placeholder here. That's us or any kind of end user for the VPN application. We'll use OpenVPN communications VPN protocol, which is another standard communications protocol in the industry. OpenVPN is really nice because it's free. It's open source. There's a lot of VPN clients that use it that are fairly low cost and robust. So any end user for a VPN application will be using an OpenVPN enabled client to connect to the FortiCloud system, we'll call it. And then that FortiCloud system routes all the traffic between the end user and the sites, which again are using IPsec. IPsec is a very old standard. It's very common in sort of the enterprise and kind of like larger company IT infrastructure. So IPsec is great in terms of end device support, like routers, modems, etc. So we use IPsec to make the connection between the modem to the FortiCloud backend, and then the FortiCloud backend will make the connection to the client. And all that is configurable. We can take away access for end users to different sites and vice versa. So we'll probably have another training on that entirely. But at the end of the day, every single site that is connected to FortiCloud in the field is accessible with regards to permissions and rules for any Locus Energy employee. So pretty much the way this works from a logistics standpoint is every new order that is processed, regardless of who's going to be using the VPN, does get registered on FortiCloud. So you can imagine FortiCloud is kind of the glue in between the end users and the modem. And so every single modem that we ship gets pre-registered on FortiCloud. When it's at DST, we get the serialized information. All that kind of gets pre-registered, just like you would register a MAC address on Locus NOC. And as soon as it connects to the internet on site, usually via cell modem, we'll be able to access it remotely. So it shouldn't require anyone to kind of be logging in, changing settings, using USB sticks. All of that is very clunky and very counterproductive. If all we're trying to do is access the site remotely, we're probably creating more problems trying to enable the VPN. It's not already enabled. So this is really just a streamlined solution going forward for any cell modem that we ship. And sort of to get into the prerequisites specifically, the LocusNet VPN only works with the Digi WR31 and 21 modems at the moment. So, you know, your multi-tax, or I don't know, if you still run into Raven Sierra Wireless, XC modems, or other sorts of modems that we provided in the past, none of this will use the LocusNet VPN. As you can imagine, it's a fairly new solution we've developed, and it's really only supported by the Digi hardware. I'm sorry, did anyone have a question?
Yeah, I have one.
Yeah, I have one real quick. So
I saw
the AT&T standard V3. Is that going to be the best way for CLS to determine whether or not it's going to be on the VPN or not?
Yeah, that's a very good way to get a quick sanity check. So if it's on AT&T standard V3, it'll be on the VPN. The modem will be pre-configured to connect to the VPN, so that'll be a no-brainer if it's on the QA dock. Another kind of good rule of thumb is if it's shipped like after like June 18th, if it's shipped in July, August, September, or in October, it should be on the LocusNet VPN. So that's really all you need to know. If it has a cell modem and it's shipped within the past 3 months, 99% chance it'll be on the LocusNet VPN. So just go there first. I'm going to show you guys how to look up sites on FortiCloud. It's very quick. It's just as fast as AT&T EOD. So I would recommend, especially if you know the site's being commissioned for the first time, you might even want to just try that first before trying to go with other methods. Once you get familiar with it, it'll be quite powerful for you. So those are the basic prerequisites. And obviously, another prerequisite is the modem needs to be connected to the internet. No surprise there, but just obviously keep that in mind if you're troubleshooting cell modem. The LocusNet VPN is not going to do a lot for you. Okay. Any other questions on this slide before I move on?
Is the
VPN dependent on the profile from AT&T, or can we just think of those as totally separate?
Totally separate. Yeah. Totally profile agnostic. In theory, it doesn't even matter if it's on AT&T. There are ways we can actually connect this hardware to a local internet connection and have it not go over cellular, and it'll still work. So completely cellular carrier VPN agnostic, which is kind of the beauty of this solution. Yeah. Just needs an internet connection. Okay. Great, good question. On the 40 Cloud side itself, we do have a wiki page on this. So rather than copy all the content there, I figure I'd just give you guys some highlights. So when we're working with the LocusNet VPN and we want to look up sites and make sure that they're connecting, et cetera, we actually use 40 Cloud's platform. And so the link is in the slide deck. But basically, you log into the 40 Cloud platform using your 40 Cloud credentials. If you do not have 40 Cloud credentials, let me know. I'll set you up with some. These are not the same as your LocusNet VPN credentials, which is a little confusing. So if you want to think about it this way, your access, like a partner, will use one set of credentials, and then your access to kind of jump into the 40 Cloud platform is a separate portal entirely. So unfortunately, they're not managed by the same set of credentials. There's actually separate sections of the portal where we set those up. As you can imagine, we don't want all of our end customers on the VPN to access our back-end platform, so those are separate, and I can hook you guys up with VPN credentials, probably for the group as a whole for the moment, just so you guys have access to the 40 Cloud platform. Not much you can do to break things, so should not be an issue in terms of sharing that access with you guys if you don't have it already. Once you log into 40 Cloud, and I'll actually go through it really quickly after I show this slide, there is a dashboard, kind of like this little web of red and green, a little bit of a rat's nest. That dashboard is really not meant for us. Our specific implementation of the 40 Cloud solution isn't really conducive to the dashboard, which is for another typical use case for this technology. So while it kind of looks kind of funky and cool, we have a lot of sites, feel free to ignore that. All you want to do basically is go to manage and then IPsec with third party. Again, think of IPsec being the end device, right? So IPsec is the guy here on the right-hand side. Third party, let's say, is the partner here. So you want to see where does this all kind of glue together with IPsec third party. Once you click on that, you'll actually just get a very easily searchable list of sites on our 40 Cloud LocusNet VPN solution. And all those sites are tagged with 6 specific metadata fields. One is a partner name, one is a site name, one is a sales order. Sound familiar so far? MAC address, and then some new ones that are kind of specific to this solution is modem serial number. That's actually the way we serialize modems on the 40 Cloud solution, so that's a very important number for us. And then modem IMEI. But you can really start with any one of these, just like you would with AT&T EOD. Try one. They're all searchable independently, so feel free to just give it a shot. And I'm actually going to show you this in a second. But once you have that site pulled up, you can check connectivity, what the actual address is, and we'll go through on how that's used specifically in this case. But any questions so far? All right, let me pull up an example here. So if I'm on 40 Cloud, it'll load the first dashboard page, which again, not very relevant for our work here. So once it loads, you can go straight to manage. IPsec with third party. And then you really get this nice list of sites. In theory, we can export this list through here. This is going to give us a spreadsheet with a lot of information. So I'd recommend, for now, just search within the portal itself. You'll see that there's a few sites that show up already. But let's say I just wanted to pull up a project like Solar's Eastman Chemicals. I'll just type in Eastman. I'm going to pull up a few sites with that name. We have a few sites on that particular site. I should say a few cell modems. But you have all the relevant metadata here. You have your partner. You have your site name. You have your MAC address, serial number, and you'll also have the IMEI as well. The IMEI is really nice in terms of cross-referencing connections on cellular carrier network like AT&T. So if you, for some reason, have a cell modem, you really don't know what it's associated with, but of course it's going to have some sort of IMEI record on EOD. You can actually pull that up pretty easily on FortiCloud. So if I were to say, look, I have no site name or partner associated with it, but I know the site is active, I can go ahead and try to copy that IMEI and paste it here. Again, it's not going to always give you what you need, but especially going forward, if there's any kind of breakdown in the process to make sure the meta fields are properly added to AT&T or whatever carrier, the IMEI is a nice point to cross-reference that's totally locus independent. So there will be some sites that have the IMEI easily searchable in both platforms. But kind of going back to the Eastman project here. Load. Oh. Loading that fast. Let me go ahead and go back to manage IP stacks with third party. Let's say go back to the Eastman Chemicals project. There's really only two interesting things here. One is the state. So we have a state of encrypting. That means it's connected. There's two other states that are available. One is not encrypting, which you can imagine means it's not connected. It's really that straightforward. There's a third state, which is unknown, which basically means it's never connected before. So typically when it ships from DST, it'll connect to the VPN for the first time. It'll start to say encrypting. So as soon as it connects to the internet on site, it'll start to say encrypting again. If it says not encrypting, you know it's probably in transit or there's actually some cellular connectivity issue. But once it says encrypting, you should be good to go. The second item here that you need to know to get to the next step is the actual site IP address. This is here in the name column as this series of octets that kind of look like an IP address, but not the one that we're familiar with for local area network connectivity. So you got 10.100.115.0 for this site. And I'll explain a little bit on exactly how you use that here. Going back to the presentation, once you have that site address, what you need to make sure is you're connected to the Viscosity Open VPN client. So again, one thing is knowing exactly where the modem is on FortiCloud. You know the modem's connected. You need to connect to the LocusNet VPN too, right? I think almost everyone has been given access to this at this point. We do have a technical application note on how you set this up for the first time. Honestly, once you set it up, I would just set your preferences to always connect to it when you boot up your laptop or computer. It's really not going to drain any resources for you. You still have internet connectivity when you're connected to the Viscosity Open VPN client, the LocusNet. So really no reason for you to not always be connected, but in case you're having issues, always make sure you're connected before you try access the device. Any questions on the viscosity portion of the LocusNet solution? Okay. And we can probably do a little bit of a workshop to set that up for folks who are having issues with that, but that's very straightforward, hopefully.
I have a
so once you're
are those
IP addresses, the LocusNet site IP address, are those static or will they change?
For the sites?
They're static, yeah. So once it's set up on the the LocusNet, it'll be static.
Okay.
So once you actually know what the site IP address is, all you need to know is what is the IP address of the device on site, the local area network IP address. So, no need to go into the details on how you can look that up. That'll be on the site drawings likely. I mean, in some cases you might be able to guess it, right, for an Aqua Suite or an MGate, as we have some standards around that. But all you need to do is combine the site IP address's first 3 octets. So an octet is kind of like these little sections of the IP address, and the last octet of the LAN IP address. So for example, if I wanted to access a device on 192.168.2.111 on site 10.100.12.0, I would just type in 10.100.12.111 into my web browser or program, whatever I'm trying to use. You don't need to worry about ports with the solution. All the ports are kind of translated. So if you're trying to access port 80 or a web GUI over HTTP, or maybe a web GUI from Huawei, for example, which would likely be HTTPS, all that's going to show up as long as you type in the IP address. No need to worry about ports. So we'll go through an example here for the Eastman Chemicals project. Since I already kind of have that up, let me go ahead and bring up a new tab here. So if I'm connected to the LocusNet VPN and I know my Eastman Chemicals project site IP address is 10.100.115.0, all I need to do to access the cell modem would be, can you guys guess what I need to change in terms of the IP address here?
Would you just change the .0 to .1?
Yeah, that's right. So to change that to .1, and that cell modem should show right up. Oh, of course, not showing up because I'm not connected to Viscosity. So let me go ahead and connect to that. Say authenticating. And then it'll eventually say connected with a little green light here. So you can see connection did not work without that, but as soon as I'm connected here, cell modem pops up right away. If you had an Aqua Suite, do 10.50, you had an IOLogic, MGate, whatever, everything is translated that way. So you can see the LocusNet VPN is really easy once you have it set up. It's really robust and flexible in terms of what devices you can access via what ports. And in theory, your access will mirror the remote access we give to clients, which makes, I think, troubleshooting really easy, especially when you're working with third-party vendors and other folks who might not even be on site if you're troubleshooting communications issues. So this is really the preferred method. We're trying to have all of our sites be standardized and registered on LocusNet VPN, as long as they use a WR31 or 21. That's kind of the caveat there, but from what we've seen, very rarely do we have sites without our cell modem of some sort. So I'm hoping that 90% of the projects you guys will be working on going forward will have LocusNet VPN capability. Any questions there before we move on to the next method?
Do you
think there's going to be an effort for us to retrofit existing sites with a VPN, or just like starting June going forward?
Yeah, no, great question. There are quite a lot of portfolios where clients have actually proactively reached out to add the LocusNet VPN to existing sites, whether they're using a WR31 with an older config or a 21, or even maybe some older sites that are just using non-Digi hardware. We are working with clients to, in some cases, retroactively add the LocusNet VPN there. It's not going to be something we actively pursue unless the client obviously wants to invest in time and money into it. But you will find that some older sites might get added to the LocusNet VPN. So it's not totally out of the question. You might want to give it a shot or check it out. But if it's before June of 2018, smaller chance it'll be there. It doesn't hurt to take a quick look.
Got it.
So I mean, your site, the IT scheme is kind of the Wild West. So we handle that.
Right. So for older sites where the IP address scheme might be unknown, I mean, a lot of those, I think, will have drawings for if there are pretty extended IP addresses, TCP/IP devices on site. So, you know, the smart loggers of the world, SMA cluster controllers, I think a lot of those will either be on the drawing, even if we didn't have a standard at the time, or you might need to use some additional tools to look those up, whether that's looking at the Aqua Suite to see what it's pulling, or using some tools on the DigiModem, such as ARP, the Address Resolution Protocol. I think we had a separate training on that, but basically just asking the modem to see what devices are asking for an IP address or have communicated with the modem recently. The other solution here is an IP address scan. So this is kind of a more advanced technique that I'm not expecting a lot of the TLS folks to necessarily use, but it's good to be aware of it. Maybe we'll have a separate training on this, but for example, if you really don't know what's on site at all and you kind of just want to get a start, what you can do is just pretend I'm on site, I'm going to have some program, and a very popular program is called Angry IP Scanner, to just try to ping all the devices on the site. So in theory, what I can do is say, I'm going to ping all the IP addresses between 10.100.115.1 and 10.100.115. Say 255, and it's going to tell me what IPs actually have devices connected to them. So sometimes if you're looking for a rogue device or a gateway that might not be well documented, this is a pretty good way to get a head start. Actually, that didn't work. Hang on. Let me try that one more time. Now, I think there might be some nuance to using Angry IP. There's some other software we use as well, so I haven't used Angry IP in a while, but in theory, when you use a scanner like this, you'll see other devices pop up. We'll have the Aqua Suite at .50, but we might have other gateways at .100, so this is a pretty decent way to search across the network for things like that. So maybe we'll have a separate training on it, but that's a sort of a good spillover way to look up devices if you really have no documentation on it. But I would say start with the Aqua Suite, start with the devices you know, and piece it together a little bit more if it's really a black box and not documented whatsoever. Hopefully we don't have too many of those. Good question, though. All right, so in the interest of time, we're going to move on here. So Obvious Remote Assist. Obvious Remote Assist is basically a solution that Obvious developed for us to log into Aqua Suites regardless of how they're connected to the internet. There are some prerequisites here, but again, this should be a really great alternative to LocusNet VPN, especially if we're not providing a cell modem. And maybe if you just want to access the Aqua Suite, you might find this might be a more streamlined solution for you. The prerequisites here are it does need to be using version 2.18 firmware, which is currently in beta, but should be publicly released fairly soon. All of our Aqua Suites that have been shipped from DST as of June 15th have the beta firmware preloaded, so that should be a prerequisite you don't have to worry about fairly recently. This can be updated for older units, but it does take some coordination and time, so I'd say most cases probably not worth doing that unless you have some real use case where you want remote access longer term. And then once the firmware is actually loaded, you do need to go and enable remote access specifically. It's not on by default. We do have DST turn it on at the shop, but otherwise, if you're loading the new firmware for the first time, you'll need to go through the menu to actually turn it on through the local display, or you can log into the Obvious locally and do that, and I can show that in a future slide here in a little bit. The only requirement with regards to internet connectivity, or I should say outside of general internet connectivity, is we have port 2022 open outbound. So if you have a firewall situation, which might be pretty common, if we're not providing the cell modem, that's the one rule we need to observe to be able to access the device remotely. So again, not an inbound connection. The session is established going outbound, so we only need to worry about port 2022 outbound. Any questions there before we go through the actual methodology on how to look this information up and access devices? Okay. To actually use the Obvious Assist solution, you do go to Obvious's sort of server that manages all this. This is located at their buildingmanageronline.com portal, remote access customer. Once you're there, you're going to get a blank screen pretty much with just a username prompt. Well, obviously, I would recommend just bookmarking this. Once you get that prompt, once you get that prompt, you will need to log in with Locus's general credentials. This is the same for everyone. It's just Locus, and then for the password agent17, close parentheses, carp. Don't ask me where that password came from, but once you use it a couple of times, it does stick with you. And once you're actually logged in, your page is going to look like this. And in fact, if you've logged in recently, it'll stay like this. So if you're trying to access multiple Aqua Suites, you can actually just leave this open, which is pretty nice. So again, you're going to get that remote access kind of login once you've used your general Locus credentials. And then all you need to know is the serial number of the Aqua Suite. So pretty self-explanatory. That's just the MAC address. And then lastly, the PIN. Now, the PIN can be looked up using a variety of methods. Most generally, it will be on the local display of the Aqua Suite. So if you're cycling through the local display, it'll say remote access enabled and then report the serial number and a remote access PIN. And then it'll also be on the web GUI under networking setup. Now, obviously, there's kind of an oversight there, right? You know, if you're trying to access a device remotely, you're not going to always have a technician be on site to look at the local display and tell it to you. You definitely won't be able to log into the GUI and look up this information. So what we have been asking DST to do is actually take a screenshot of this page in our QA docs once any Aqua Suite shipped, so you can easily look this information up. There are some orders where we haven't been explicit with the DST to make sure that they connect the Aqua Suite to the internet, which actually is required for that PIN to be generated. So there will be cases where this is technically enabled, but you won't have the PIN to look up, in which case you do need to ask a tech to check the local display. But we have asked DST to make sure that they capture some sort of PIN as part of the QA/QC process going forward. So we'll always have that PIN easily referenced internally without having to ask for assistance from someone on site. Once you have that MAC address and PIN, it's as easy as typing those in. So I'll do that here really quick. But I think what we had was here. Echo Charlie, 605 4871, and then PIN is 4DE220. There is a little CAPTCHA. Click on it and wait for it to give you a check mark. Give it some time. If you skip or do it too quick, it'll kick you back out. So you end up wasting more time than just waiting. Once it's your check mark, get access and boom, you're logged in. You can do anything that you would typically do within the Aqua Suite GUI. You can ping devices, you can add devices, remove devices, check, do upload connectivity checks, and all that sort of stuff. What's also nice is once you've logged in, I think as long as it's within a 24-hour period, you can save this URL and keep it up. So if you're jumping between Aqua Suites, you just use that URL, go into the next one, and pull up the new URL for the new Aqua Suite once you put in the serial number and PIN, and you can actually work with multiple Aqua Suites at the same time. So this is a really good solution when we're shipping loose Aqua Suites for retrofit applications or we're just shipping our equipment with no cell modem, you should be able to get into the Aqua Suite and do the majority of your work. Any questions there?
Yeah, Daniel, I have a quick question. I've noticed on the Aqua Suites before, and they're probably older ones, that remote access has still been like an option. But I guess if it's not on the new firmware, it'll never give us a PIN or anything like that to get in. Is that correct?
I'm not sure what you mean. So if it's on the latest firmware, you're saying you won't get a PIN?
Yeah, so we had an Aqua Suite today, and it was an older one, and we went through the process of trying to enable remote access, and it was saying that it was enabled, but never gave us a PIN. So I don't think it was on the newest. It ended up not being on the newest firmware.
I think you're right there. So do be careful. There have been a couple of betas for the remote access solution before V2.18. There was a 2.16 and 2.17 that we were testing with, and the local display does look a little bit different than this, and I believe those will not work with the solution. So in theory, anything shipped since June will be on the latest firmware, but we might have some other units in the field, maybe pre-June, that we were testing with, that were using an older version of this. So yeah, you might have slightly different behavior if you're not on the latest firmware.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks, Daniel.
Yeah, no problem. All right, so jumping into the last option here, which is pretty broad, and so I kind of left it as the not preferred method in a lot of cases, just because there's so many implications and requirements and different ways of doing this. So obviously, it's been kind of the de facto way to access devices remotely up to this point, but I would really recommend, especially for units within the past 3 months and going forward, we try to use either option 1 or 2 for remote access. That said, static IPs are probably going to be an existing thing for quite a while, especially for our legacy fleet, so definitely worth talking about some of the pros, cons, and considerations when using static IP addresses. So as you can generally guess, overall, the prerequisites for static IPs are kind of broad. As long as it's connected to the internet using one of our cell modems and it was shipped after 2016, there's likely some way to use the static IP address remote access method. In theory, this will work for anything on AT&T since 2016. We are considering adding Verizon in the future, which is a different conversation altogether, but Verizon, in theory, will also fall within the general static IP address solution parameters, or I should say framework. Again, we'll also have LocusNet VPN and obvious remote assists. So even going to Verizon as an option, we're going to prefer the first 2 methods, but we're never going to completely make the static IP address sort of method unavailable. This will always be kind of a backdoor. So a really brief overview of AT&T APNs, just to kind of refresh people's memory. I'll put together a really great wiki article on a lot of what I'm going to cover over the next few slides, so feel free to bookmark that if you're running into a lot of questions around how to use AT&T and APNs. He has a pretty good breakdown here. Basically, we've had one profile that is a very much a legacy profile called Profile 19. I'm actually going to start with this. So Profile 19 has a private APN that has no remote access capabilities. It tunnels directly to our Amazon Cloud Web Services database. So this is kind of like everything that is, Elegate 120, 320 will be on Profile 19. We do have some really old CNI projects on Profile 19. If it's on Profile 19, there are some options to switch APNs to potentially have that work for remote access, and I'll get into that in a little bit, but I think we're all pretty familiar with that. But just to give you some background on Profile 19. We have, outside of Profile 19, basically 4 profiles that all do the same thing. They give us public static IP addresses that are remotely accessible and on the general internet. The oldest of those is Profile 15, so you'll probably see a lot of multi-tech modems using Profile 15 with the static IP address. We've also used Profile 24 for older units, mostly with Swinnerton, when we were kind of giving them their own profile and APN. Most recently, we've been leveraging Profile 27 as kind of a nice IP pool when we move things over to that APN permanently. And then lastly, the profile you guys are probably most familiar with is Profile 21. So all four of those kind of operate in the same way. Once they work on those APNs, you can access those via public static IP addresses. You look those up on AT&T. You type those into your web browser, do some port forwarding, and you go. The last APN is Profile 28. Everything within the past, I think, year has been shipped with Profile 28 by default. So you'll usually come across somewhere commissioning on Profile 28. We want to leave units on Profile 28 whenever possible. There are some configurations such as AT&T Hybrid and actually the standard profiles where we've allowed sort of a switching between APNs, specifically over Profile 28 and 21. However, do avoid that whenever possible. One reason is with the Digi modems most recently, they actually take quite a long time to switch over to the backup APN, and especially if you're having cellular communication issues, that can be exacerbated quite a bit. So historically, this switch on the AT&T and Digi sort of interface side would happen immediately. However, the actual connectivity to APNs has changed within the past year or so, and so for the modems to actually understand that they're no longer connected to the internet, reestablish connectivity to the backup APN will take upwards of 30 minutes sometimes to do maybe a few hours to actually connect. So in some cases, you may run into trying to troubleshoot a site. It might be connected to the internet, and you try to access it remotely by switching the profiles, and then you end up really losing a lot of time, or perhaps missing the vote entirely because we're no longer connected to the internet. And of course, once you try to switch it back, no guarantee you'll connect right away either. It does take the Digi some time, so not up to the idea that try to switch back to its primary. AT&T also has a static IP address pool for local energy, so nothing new. All the maximum number of IP addresses available is on this table. We've saturated a lot of that and have tried to make space. So whenever possible, just because it is harder to maintain units on 21 and switching those back to 18, this is not always ideal. The other thing is there is always risk of losing access completely. Sometimes configuration changes happen on an ad hoc basis by whoever's touching the site. This isn't documented here for support. And so when you're switching the APN, you may actually permanently lose access in some situations and circumstances, even if it's rare. Whenever you're doing that, you're always introducing risk. So it should almost be the last option we ever try for switching profiles. I just wanted to make a note on that. Now, that isn't to say there aren't other options out there with regards to static IP address, and I'm actually going to go into that in a little bit, but any questions on some of the cons and risks associated with AT&T APN profile switching? Okay. Great. Now, not all is lost, though. I know LocusNet VPN is fairly new. There's some requirements in terms of it being fairly, shipped fairly recently. Sometimes we, I don't know, might not be able to work with the LocusNet VPN. So good news. Everything that's on the Locus Profile 28 APN is actually remotely accessible by us. There's just kind of a little bit of a trick. So Profile 28 is the standard APN and profile for all long-term operation for modems that support it. So it's ideal. It's our custom APN. We have basically unlimited space on that APN, and they, in fact, all work on the same network together. So if you look at this diagram on the right-hand side, you can ignore some of the annotations are not necessarily relevant for us. Every single modem over on the remote side, on the left-hand side, is on the same APN. So it's as if they're on the same network to some degree. So these IP addresses here, this is your AT&T, it's kind of like the local VPN. If you're connected, you can access all of those sites, and specifically those cell modems using that static IP address. It's just protected behind our custom APN. So while it's not publicly available, there is mobile terminated data, which means you can access the device from another device remotely. The nice thing here is it does not require additional setup through LocusNet VPN or subscription with LocusNet VPN. It's secure. As I mentioned, you can't access it outside the network, but once you're inside, you can access it. And really, it is the primary APN, as in the preferred standard APN for all modems since we implemented the AT&T standard configuration. So the majority of our CNI is already on Profile 28, unless it were to switch to 21 for commissioning purposes. So to actually access this, there's a little bit of a trick. I will probably provide some better instructions in a wiki article early next week. But we are going to be using a program called AnyDesk, which is basically remote desktop software to access a laptop which is already on the Profile 28. The idea here is we're going to leave the server on all the time for anyone to use. If we find that we need more of these, we can probably add more. There's probably some longer-term ways we can facilitate this, but for now, we've been using this fairly successfully on the application side. We wanted to expand it further. So AnyDesk is just any kind of remote desktop application like TeamViewer or LogMeIn, you guys might already be familiar with. Locus Energy has some licenses available for AnyDesk, so we can download this. Basically, once you type in the specific remote desk IP or ID for the laptop that is connected to one of our cell modems on AT&T, VPN 21 or 28, you'll be able to access that as you would need to for troubleshooting. So, for example, I wanted to pull something up here. Let's see, on AT&T EOD. If we have a good example. I'm trying to think of something that we're commissioning these days, really recently. Anybody in the group have a site they were working with recently? It comes to mind? I'm going to go ahead and pull up the document retrofit. So that's actually the project that I was working on. So again, I'm logged into a laptop that's already connected to the cell modem on Profile 28. So all I should need to do is actually type in the static IP address that's showing up on AT&T EOD here, and then go. Fingers crossed, cell modem's online, and here we are. So just like a public static IP address, you can use this to access the Digi devices behind the port sorting. So I want to talk about port forwarding rules a little bit as well. Another nuance to static IP addresses is the involvement of port forwarding and complications around that. But before I do that, are there any questions on public static IP addresses and Profile 28 on AT&T? Which is again private static IP address with mobile terminated data. I know there's a lot of words, but any questions on access through static IPs? All right. We'll keep on rolling through then. So regarding port forwarding, Historically, the Digimodem has had a very easy way to set up port forwarding. And basically, port forwarding, as a brief synopsis, is passing through a port externally to a port internally for a specific IP address, right? So you're saying, well, I know the modem's static IP address on the internet exists, but I actually want to access that device internally, and I want to access a specific protocol or port to communicate with a certain application. So again, that could be the web server for the Aqua Suite over port 80, and you guys kind of know the tried and true trick of typing in public static IP address :1020, which we kind of just came up with as external port for port 80, the very first rule here on the list, and then use that. There were some limitations with this method on the Digimodem. Specifically, it was limited to 30 rules, which really worked for us for a lot of sites, but we did have use cases where we ran out of it. We needed to sacrifice certain rules for others, and it got very complicated. So that was one of the big limitations for us, is just the number of devices and the number of ports we needed to facilitate. The other limitation is we cannot use a lot of the more advanced DigiFirewall capabilities with this system. So I think lots of folks are familiar with this table. This table will start to become pretty relevant with modem shipments in the past couple months. Basically, again, BGP standard 3 has changed a lot of this, where we're now using the firewall feature. So the firewall feature is actually pretty straightforward. Not as intimidating as it might sound. Basically, to just take a look at what it's doing, you can go ahead and within the Digi click on Security Firewall. You're going to see a long list of basically text that explains what the rules are for firewall. Now, a lot of the rules might cover protection from external connections, limiting device outbound communication, etc. But a lot of the things that you guys will be familiar with request for forwarding, I think you'll kind of get the hang of. Basically, there's the syntax for connecting from the cellular connection through a specific port, say port 1100, to an internal IP address, 192.192.100, the internal, right? So a lot of that will be very familiar. However, the idea here is you guys should always look this up. The AEs historically may have done some custom rule sets per customer request. However, we have come up with a standard to make this a little bit easier to understand. The standard is, again, in that wiki article that Colin put together, but the idea here is we know that each device on site, we have a certain theme for connectivity. So for Aqua Suite, for example, 192.168.2.51, we know that our cameras are always going to be on .81. We know that inverters, when supported, we'd like to have on .101 for IP address based. M-Gates, we've now moved to .31. All of this is covered in a spreadsheet in the wiki. And what we've decided to do is basically standardize an port forwarding schema to make it easy to understand what you're doing. So the basic rule set here is you're going to use for the external port the protocol port plus the IP address. So let me give an example. If I wanted to access an Aqua Suite, the internal port for that is 80, right? And I know the Aqua Suite IP address is 51. Well, all I would do then is type in the static IP address, type in colon, and then 80, which again is the internal service or port for HTTP, .51. If I wanted to access the next Aqua Suite, it would still be 80, then I would type in .50, not .52, I would type in 52, et cetera, et cetera. So that's going to be broadly supported in the firewall and pre-set up. That's going to make Aqua Suite access fairly easy. It's going to be the same exact thing for M-Gates. I think that's going to be 90% of the use cases for you guys. It does extend to other ports and protocols that the AE team may use, but here, for example, we have it for cameras. For cameras that are requiring HTTPS, we will allow port 443. So again, for port 443, what we're doing there is basically forwarding 443, and actually just the first two digits of that is 44 and then the IP address. So for example, if you had a camera that required remote access to HTTPS, it would be 4481. And so with the new system, we're hoping it's fairly easy to guess what the port would be. You can look this up on the firewall, and this is going to be a supported way to access devices remotely. You can imagine it's a lot easier to use LocusNet VPN, but it is something I wanted you guys to have some exposure to in case you need to fall back to a static IP address method while we have some fragmentation. So I think we're running out of time, but any questions on port forwarding or where to look up this stuff?
I just had a quick question. It's not like super related to this, but I know our old documentation for cluster controllers used to say to put them at .2.51. Is that something we might want to update moving forward if our office is going to be there?
I don't think so, Taylor, just because the cluster controller is no longer being deployed. We will probably have updated documentation for SMA's gateway, which is the data manager M, which you guys have gotten a lot of exposure to the past few weeks. So we'll make sure to have the updated IP address set up for that.
Okay, cool.
But I don't think we're going to go back. I think for older projects, the applications engineers who are involved there will be able to utilize the documentation we have and make it work. So we'll only worry about the standards for projects and hardware going forward. Really quickly, some additional considerations. As folks know, we do have sort of a dynamic DNS solution that we've used mostly for external use. It does require mobile terminated data. So all the public static IP addresses, I mentioned 15.1.427, and even the dynamic IP address VPN, which actually supports this. It's not preferred. Honestly, it's kind of a dying solution for us. There's limited functionality. We really only set it up for RTAC HMIs and cameras when we are worried about giving the customer a static IP address. Now that we have a lot of other remote access solutions available that are enabled day one, this is something that we're going to likely shift away from. The main drawback of using this is it does cost some additional subscriptions to use no IP, basically because it's a DDNS solution and service. And so the basic explanation is the end device will connect or connect to a DNS service, such as no IP. Say, look, we have a relationship already. I'm this device. I'm going to just tell you every single time my IP address changes, so that whoever's looking to access me can just ask you where I'm located, and you'll let them know. DNS is something that every website's going to use, Google, Amazon. You're basically looking up the IP address for that server using a DNS system, so this is no different. The biggest drawback is if the IP address is likely to change, which it is for certain profiles, if you're troubleshooting this or rebooting modems, that's going to be non-ideal for you to access remotely in real time. The DDNS will update. It does take some time for that to be enabled. It's not very reliable, and the performance is not great with rebooting things all the time. So this is really a not ideal solution going forward. The other sort of additional consideration that I wanted to mention really quickly is we are considering using Verizon Carrier going forward as an option, not necessarily the standard option. And the support and applications engineering teams will get a lot of training on the Verizon platform if we do productize this. That said, none of the solutions that I covered today are in conflict with using Verizon. We'll be able to use all of our LocusNet VPN solution. Obvious remote assist is obviously unaffected. Verizon actually will be giving us public static IP addresses, for better or for worse, when we first start to use them. And then eventually we will have an equivalent of our AT&T Profile 28 as a backdoor option if all else fails. So Verizon being implemented here isn't going to change anything we learn or start to use over the next few weeks. It's just going to kind of supplement just in terms of standard things. It doesn't really change the methodology. I just wanted to kind of mention that briefly. With that said, I've been talking for about 30 minutes. So I'm gonna stop. But does anybody have any questions? Hopefully that was helpful. I think folks will start to use some of these solutions, and if there are questions, we can definitely iron them out. Perhaps schedule a follow-up. But in the immediate, any kind of questions, concerns, or clarifications you guys want on these three options: LocusNet VPN, obvious remote assist, or the static IP address?
I just have a quick question. It's mainly
regarding like the Swinnerton sites. Do we not have remote access to any of them generally through any methods?
Okay.
Great question. So Swinnerton is kind of like a special partner for us. We have a lot of sites with them, and they're actually quite knowledgeable in terms of like remote access and troubleshooting. They know our hardware very well. They basically procure some from Locus Energy, just so we can sort of maintain the hardware configuration and the AT&T billing. But they will basically own all of the configuration for the modem after it's installed, and that includes blocking external access to a public static IP address. For us, they will set up their own VPN solution. Basically, their technicians and their network engineers will have remote access to the modems, but we will not get that access. So you could almost pretend, even if the modem is provided by Locus, it's not our cell modem to support. So in those cases, we do have an agreement with Swinnerton that they really should have limited expectations with regards to remote support. We can give some access or some support in terms of maybe Modbus communications, best practices, and troubleshooting, and things of that nature. And perhaps with the advent of obvious remote assist, we'll be able to be even more active in giving them support. But Swinnerton should have some limited expectations in terms of what we're able to do, just because of how they will take over our cell modems config and lock it down. A really good question. I know come up a lot in terms of older sites. There are quite a few older sites with Swinnerton that are set up this way, and we are starting to ship a new portfolio of sites that are set up this way too. So this is a pretty standard thing with almost all Swinnerton projects.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, I got 2 calls yesterday about it, like back to back, and I just looked at the QA doc and realized that they're like IP address is different than normal, and their profile was 27, and I couldn't access it on anything, but they were getting a solid service light, and we were getting data. So I figured that was the case.
Yep. And Swinnerton is a partner in that bucket. We would never think that would be a good idea to apply across the board, but we do have a special relationship with Swinnerton there. Sean is the assigned applications engineer for Swinnerton too, so I don't think Sean's in the line, but we can also direct a lot of commissioning calls, or at least make him aware of that, so he can coordinate with Swinnerton going forward. But yeah, Swinnerton is sort of special.
Cool. Thank you.
Yep, no problem. Any other questions? So great. I'll let you guys go. Thanks a lot. Appreciate the time. I hope this was helpful. I know there's a lot of solutions out there. Sometimes you just want one thing to do everything. That's what we're trying to have LocusNet VPN do, but it will take us some time to get there. So hopefully, in the meantime, more options are good. We just need to become aware of what those are, which scenarios are. So thanks again.
Awesome.
Thank you, Daniel. I'll send you this recording.
Great. Thank you, guys.